All right, so we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Cotrera, and I work in the Office of the Vice Provost Academic as the Program Development and Curriculum Innovation Specialist. What that means is I can support programs in all the different types of ways that they are thinking about and visualizing and actualizing their program. Things like courses and teaching and learning stuff, that's a different office. That's the Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning. The Teaching Commons, they are such fantastic resources and supports, and they can actually help with some of this curriculum stuff that we'll be talking about more in the next workshop, but I'll flag them here. But it's been really wonderful to work with programs on things like new programs or major modifications or minor modifications. But there's also this kind of space where you have the opportunity to think about your program and think about the curriculum in this kind of cycle that we call quality assurance, but it's really a nice way of being able to do this big overview of your program. And so the type of support I can provide is that type of that helping think about that big picture. Again, there's a cat here. My PhD is in education with a focus on teaching and learning and curriculum that's meaningful to students. I define meaningful as critical and focused on social justice and focus on the future. And so what I bring to these conversations is that kind of commitment to students and their futures, and not just in this way of like employability, but really in the way of like having knowledge and skills and values that can help them navigate I don't know, it seems so redundant. I come from a history background to say an increasingly precarious world. But also, I mean, the world is also on fire, right? So what we're going to be doing today is it's an hour and a half long workshop. We also have a special guest, which is really great. I'm not going to be super watchful on the time because we're going to be doing this as a video. This will be posted on YouTube. And so I want to make sure we get all the information. So again, leave when you want to. This workshop is about where do we begin? And the CPR process, the self-study in particular, can seem very overwhelming. And so what we really want to focus on is like, where might you begin? What might this process look like for you? And really, like, what do all these acronyms mean? So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to start with introductions from the team in the Office of the Vice Provost Academic. I'm going to talk briefly about like what the UCAP is and what the CPR is for. And then I'm going to talk about the self-study review in particular, the self-study timeline. And by that, I mean suggestions of ways and how you can begin this work. And then like kind of dive into where we can begin. Then, like I said, we do have a guest today who is a faculty member, a chair who has just gone through the CPR to talk about their experiences. And then I'll just put some reminders and contact information, things like that out there. When we talked about this at the launch meeting, Lyndon Martin, our current Vice Provost Academic, said it was going to be cool. I feel like the scale for coolness is really going to need to be redefined for this to be cool. But my goal is for it to be entertaining enough that it is not terrible. So that's the bar I am working with today. So we're going to start with introductions from the Vice Provost Academic Office. I first want to introduce Jennifer. Jennifer, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I will. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Bethune. I'm here on a temporary basis, replacing Emily Rush, and who's on a parental leave. I will be sending you lots of emails, and I look forward to working with you to make this process fulfilling for your programs and for you. And look forward to this workshop too. Thanks, Samantha.
What's really great about Jennifer being in our office right now during Emily Rush's parental leave, although we do miss Emily very much, is that Jennifer comes from this amazing background of quality assurance. She's also been at York and I think taught at York as well as done her PhD there. So it's really nice to have her in the office. The other person who is super, super important to this whole process, you've already gotten emails from her and you will continue to get emails from her, is Nina, our UCAP coordinator. Nina, can you introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, everyone. Hello, my name is Nina Unantana, and I'm the Quality Assurance Coordinator. And any questions, you can send it to UCAP, and I'll try my best to answer the questions you have as soon as possible.
And as I mentioned, because we have such a large rota, we also are like making sure that when we're emailing programs, we're like getting the right email addresses and, all of that stuff. And that's a different thing when there's like 8 programs versus, I don't know, like Nina, I think it's like 1 million programs we're doing this year, right? Something like that. Yeah, give or take. So just the patience and as we ensure we get the right contacts, and you'll definitely be hearing from Nina. She's so invaluable to this process. Okay, let's get started with the slide deck. All right, so when we talk about this as a quality assurance process, and that can seem kind of isolating if that's not necessarily language that you're used to or comfortable with. We as York University, we are accredited through like Universities Canada as well as the like quality assurance in Ontario, and there's all these different kind of areas. And so for Canadian universities, I'm just going to do like as big picture as possible. To be seen as a quality institution, they need to meet certain criteria. And one of that is to have a quality assurance policy and procedure process. So like one of the questions it has is like, does the university offer like undergrad or graduate programs that animate the mission and goals of the university and that actually lead to a university degree? And the like quality council, right, has a defined degree level expectations. Sometimes you call them DLEs or oodles. And so we want to make sure that like our programs align with all of these different elements. One of the pieces of criteria is that the university has a quality assurance policy that results in the cyclical or continuous assessment of the programs and support services, which includes the participation by those directly involved in the delivery of the program, right? So it's not like this thing that someone else is coming in and being like, oh, this is what your program looks like. We want you, someone who knows your program, directly involved with the process to be able to think about your program. As well as other institutional colleagues and external experts and stakeholders to be able to also kind of think about that. And that's why we have things like an external review process. And when we are talking about this quality assurance policy, we have that. It's called the UCAP, the York University Quality Assurance Procedures. And there are so many acronyms everywhere in education, but especially when you are starting this process, you're going to hear acronyms like UCAP and CPR and OIPA and ISR a lot. And UCAP is that document that provides all of the procedures and the policies, and it helps define what and how things like new programs can come about. It identifies the reviews of existing programs, i.e. the cyclical program review. It talks about modifications to existing programs, the major modification and the non-major modification, which is not the same as the minor modification, which is also 3 different categories, and the closure of programs. So if you don't know the UCAP or like didn't know it existed, no judgment, go take a look, because you'll actually be able to see a lot of the elements that we talk about when we are looking at a new program proposal, for example. But what we're focusing on right now is the cyclical program review. We also have a new website. We really wanted to make it more user-friendly, far less clicks to get to where you want to go. Ironically, though, this morning we just realized that the support page that we've created for you isn't linking properly. So we'll make sure you have that link, but it for some reason we have to figure out why the internet has made it difficult for us to get it to you easily. So if we look at that big quote and we think about the cyclical program review, then the purpose, though, is then for the program and those who are part of the program to review and to assess and to explore if how the program is in alignment with the mission and goals of the university, but also the mission and goals that you have set out for yourself as members of that program, and whether or not it aligns with and fulfills the requirements for a university degree. The thing about the like oodles and DLEs is that they often get these really bad reputation for being these big, scary accounting things. But the fact is, they're not that hard to meet once you start thinking about your program holistically. And we'll talk more about that in the next workshop when we talk specifically about curriculum and program learning outcomes. The other purpose of the cyclical program review, and I think this is kind of like the most important part, it identifies like how or why or in what ways the program can continuously improve on doing the things that it wants to do. Because sometimes things like, you're going along and you teach your course, but like, are we thinking about the program as a whole, whether or not it's doing what it needs to do? It's so easy for us as educators, and I count myself as an educator. I do some teaching at the graduate and undergraduate level at institutions that aren't York, to just focus so much on our classroom and to like make sure that our pedagogy and our teaching practices are like in alignment with student needs. And so this process helps us take a step back to think about how does that piece work in the whole, and how can the whole make sure that all of those pieces work really well together as well. And so when I think about like ways that the program can continuously improve, it is very easy to be like, oh, we just need 4 more faculty members in a new building. And as soon as we get that, we're good. But I want you to like think about the types of things that might also come up when you're doing this review. And maybe amongst you in the program, you've already had some of these conversations. This is actually, the cyclical program review is an opportunity to start kind of recording those. So when I say continuous improvement, I mean like questioning, are there curricular changes that might work better for students in the future? And by future, I mean like the next 3 years, the next incoming cohort of students. Are there teaching and learning elements in the program that can be better explored as like key hallmarks of the program? Not just something like one professor is doing in their class that's super cool, but could we leverage that to make that actually like a really key element of how students understand the program? Are you seeing problems with retention? When you look at students' experiences or hear their experiences, are there ways throughout their program that maybe you can remedy an issue of retention? Could you work more like integratively and collaboratively with library? Could you work more integratively and collaboratively with things like the Learning Commons or the Writing Center? And like the thing, because I come from a curriculum background and that's my role at the university, I really like to think about the vision of your program. What is the vision of your program? Is everyone in the program in alignment with that? Is that articulated or is that implicit? Spoiler alert, for a lot of programs, it's quite implicit, right? Because it's like, well, someone else can deal with writing it. Well, actually, that's what this process can do. And you can really come together to articulate the vision of the program. And is the program structured in a way that best aligns with that vision, that it then meets the objectives that you have provided for your program? And how can you make sure that you're keeping track of this? How can you make sure that someone always like has their eye on the ball about whether or not you are in alignment with this vision? So I participated in a review like 10 years ago as a as an adjunct faculty at a place that wasn't York. And I wasn't really that invested in the process because I'm just an adjunct faculty, like whatever, I'll go to the staff meetings. But here are things that we found in the review. One, we found that students were dropping out after 2 years in the program, which was interesting and something that like people kind of realized, but we could really see those numbers. 2, we saw that the core courses, we had 4 core courses and 3 of them had the exact same, were mapped onto the same program learning outcomes. So it was like, Well, what's the point of 3 different courses if they're all doing the same thing? We knew they were not doing the same thing, but when you looked at the structure of the program, it seemed like they were doing the same thing. And we also saw, to our surprise, because this was just like an interdisciplinary general bachelor's, that some students were actually going to graduate school, which was not expected for the demographics of students, and that wasn't necessarily set up. So those were some of the findings that we had. How did we find these findings? Well, I say we, but for this one, it wasn't me. It was the chair and a small team that shared that. They looked at enrollment and retention data, and they were seeing these numbers, and they were like, we all kind of knew that, but seeing the data was mind-blowing. We also did some curriculum mapping exercises to be able to see, like, yeah, we were completely, like, these 3 core courses were doing the same thing. Again, we knew in our classrooms they weren't, but on paper they were. And we also like did some post-graduation surveys, and we also just like asked people, well, who's writing reference letters? And we were able to then track that. So those were like the data sources that helped us come up with this. And then again, if we're thinking about continuous improvement, well, what are things that we could do? Sure, like making all of us adjunct faculty like permanent would have been great, but also we could see things that we could do in a curricular structure that someone like myself, who was adjunct, as well as students, as well as the tenure track faculty, could all contribute to making these suggestions. And one of the suggestions that we got from student interviews was that we had to like actually reassess what the second year courses were. And what we found is we were so focused on the 4th year and what students were doing in the 4th year, we didn't really realize how integral the second year was to just like introduce students to the program in a fun way. We were so worried about preparing them for the seriousness of 4th year that we were scaring students off with the courses we were offering in second year. So we revised those courses, and we also we made, rather than these 2 courses being core courses, we only made 1 of those core courses. This was something that I was the most involved with when we realized that the 3 core courses and the 2 and 3rd year and 1 and 4th year were doing the same, mapped to the same program learning outcomes. One, we just articulated the differences between the 3 courses to ourselves, and they're supposed to work together. So then we were able to talk about, what are you doing in your courses? How can we better work together? And it was really great because I was like, look, I'm an adjunct faculty. I'm not teaching more than I can teach, but that's not actually what happened. It was like, okay, if you set the foundation, how can we build on that? And it was just these amazing conversations. We also realized that we should probably write the program learning outcomes to better identify the uniquenesses of these different experiences. And so that's something else that we did. We also created a plan for like a midterm meeting with the faculty of all the core courses and an end of term meeting as a way to ensure that we were on track with kind of working together, and to keep track of students who may have been keeping track of students who we knew were going through that. So we were able to come up with these really great recommendations. And for the graduate school one, we saw that the students that were applying were like top level students, and that we didn't necessarily want to increase the academics because that would leave other students behind. Instead, what we did was created like extracurricular opportunities to just introduce students to graduate school. One of the things was saying that there were office hours to ask questions about graduate school, and it was promoted like that. It was the same office hours that the faculty member always ran, but we were able to articulate it to help students understand that. So here we saw data, we thought about it, we analyzed it, and then we came up with some really interesting solutions, and then we implemented them. And like that is like the best case scenario for a cyclical program review, because now we were able to make really impactful changes on the program that were in alignment with what all of us individually were already doing. So the the cyclical program review involves a few pieces. One is the self-study. That's what you're working on this academic year. The external review is the next academic year. And then there's follow-up reports. We're really just focusing on the self-study. When I'm providing you with support in these workshops, it's really just involved with the self-study right now. If you take a look at the launch meeting video, and I recommend that you do if you haven't, you'll see that timeline that really specifies better the different dates and those follow-up reports and 18 months after, et cetera, et cetera. And so there is a bit of there is a domino effect of if you want your external review in the fall, then your deadline is in July. If you want your external review in the winter, then your deadline is in October. But right now, we're just going to focus on the self-study. I like to think of the self-study as a snapshot of your current program and then the view of your program in the future. And when I say current program, I often get the question like, well, we're already going through some changes. Like, how do we talk about those changes? And that's okay to talk about your program as the space where you were, the space like what you are doing right now, the space where you are, where you're going to be like maybe next year, because you already have a process in place that is going to make sure you have these new major modifications. But it's also to think like, what do we want those modifications to look like if you've already done them? And a vision of, this isn't some sort of necessarily this sort of weird radical vision of so far in the future. It's like the students in 5 years that have gone through the pandemic for a huge part of their schooling, and that will be facing climate crisis and, all these different things. Like, really, what do we want to ensure our program is for those students in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? When we say vision for the future, that's what we're thinking of. How do we respond to this current moment in our program and make sure not just our courses, but our program? And how do we do that over the next 7 years when we have to do the cycle again? When we are super excited to do, not have to, super excited to do the cycle again. I like to say to people that, because I think there is this impression that the CPR is this test. If you can read the OIPA data, the Office of the Institutional Planning and Analysis data, like, can you read those statistics? Like, it's just a test to see if you can read them. And that's not what the CPR is. And so that fear that is what you are being tested on, that's not actually what the CPR is. The CPR is the opportunity to explore the big picture of your program. And we provide you the data and support to help you with that. And then to make sure that you are getting elements on track to ensure the program stays on track, right? So again, I work with a lot of programs to do with learning outcomes. And they're in a drawer somewhere, I don't know, someone has them. Well, actually, they can really articulate what your vision is and what the program is. How can we make sure that is what the program is? And how can we make sure we're watching students' experiences in the program to make sure they are meeting those outcomes, that we are doing the objective that you identify? So that's really what the CPR is. It's a big picture view and then a plan to ensure that there's always an eye on that big picture view. You should think of this process as collaborative, analytical, and evidence-based, and that it is a series of conversations. It's a series of provided data. I mean, you can create your own data, but when we provide you data, again, it's not a test if you're reading it. It is a gift. It's something that we're saying, like, here, use this. This is going to really, really help you. And then it's also analysis. So it is all of those things together. Sometimes I think that it's like, okay, well, the chair will just write the whole thing and take care of it. No. It is like everyone should be involved. Everyone from faculty, tenure track, to adjunct, to students, to staff, to other stakeholders, to collaborators, like everyone should be able to participate in these conversations. And something that Alice Pitt had said, who is our former vice provost academic, is like, you're also not like graded on your writing. So if different people write different answers, it's not like there is going to be a grade about whether or not that writing kind of blends together as harmoniously as it might in other pieces of writing. And I think actually that thinking about it like writing an article is quite useful in that way. Think about it like writing an article, and your thesis is, our program is good, but of course it can be better. Because of course your course can be better, or your program can be better. I mean, I know that when I'm done this workshop, I'll be like, oh, I could have done that better, right? I think as educators, especially because we're interfacing with students, and so many times when I'm talking to faculty members, like they're so committed to those experiences. Like I think a lot of people have kind of an instinct about ways to make your course better, but also like ways to make the student experience better. And so if you think about the CPR with this as a thesis, then know that you don't need to be on the defensive, right? But you can be really open about ways that it can grow, it can develop. Okay, is this a lot of work? Okay, well, yeah, research is a lot of work. Collaborative research is a lot of work. Analysis is work. Writing is work. Collaborative writing is work. Peer review is work. So I'm not going to say it's not a lot of work. But if you wait until a month before the deadline, it is a lot of work. If you think about this now as a process over the next academic year, and you develop a planning and time structure for answering questions, analyzing, thinking about recommendations, talking about it collaboratively, then it can be something that results in really useful findings and recommendations for your program. Now, you could wait till the last minute and it will also be very useful, but it will also probably be so stressful that you're not even at the useful part. So it's been a real pleasure to work with programs over the last year in which we are talking fairly regularly. And again, we can do this together with your programs as well, because I feel like people have been less rushed when it has gotten to the end, and therefore more proud of the work and what it represents about their program and their program's future. And that's been really great. So yeah, it is a lot of work, but it is work that can be planned and managed in a really productive way. Now, I want to be really clear. This is your self-study. It is your review. You can work on this however you want and whenever you want. I'm going to provide you with suggestions of when to engage with some of these questions. If you don't do that, that does not matter. It is your review. We are providing suggestions based on past experiences, but it's your review, and the analysis and recommendations are also based on your review. So, you know, if I was invited to a meeting and I was like, oh, well, I see this, maybe here's a recommendation. And you're like, no, that's not the recommendation we want to make. That's cool. Make your recommendations. So I just want to be really clear that the Office of the Vice Provost Academic is here to support your process, but we are not dictating what that process is for you. And we're not prescribing what that process is for you, nor what the elements of analysis and recommendations are. Sometimes people send me their CPR self-study before they submit it, and I provide recommendations on whether or not they are like, similar when I'm doing editing work, right? Are you articulating the element of what your thesis is? Not could you have provided a better recommendation? So I just want to be really clear about that. Our goal is that if we provide you with greater support on how to work through the review, that you're going to spend less time being like, what is OIPA data? And more time on being able to think strategically about your programs and making recommendations for it to continuously develop. So I just want to be really clear that these supports are to take some of that stress off of you in trying to figure out, like, is this a test? How defensive do I need to be? And more on allowing you to be able to use that time that you're spending to think about analysis and recommendations. So I just want to be clear about that. And we have developed a series of 5 workshops. The next one in October is going to be on curriculum and learning outcomes. In February or March, we're going to talk about storytelling with data. In February, maybe early March, you're going to get a data kit from the Office of Institutional Planning and Analysis, or OIPA. And that can be really intimidating for some people. So we're going to talk about how to read it, how to use it, how to just access the files. You're also, for those of you who have kind of larger size programs, you're also going to get the student surveys from the Office of Institutional, the ISR, the Institute for Social Research, and they work in a little bit different way than the data kits. And so you're going to get that as well. So that's what we'll do in March. We work really closely with OIPA. We're neighbors in our office. And so there's going to be some other OIPA supports too, maybe short videos, maybe like office hours, data clinics. We already have a dedicated email set up. So we're really thinking about how to best make that process work for you. In April, we're going to talk about retreat planning, although I actually recommend you do an earlier retreat. I recommend 2 retreats. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And in June, we'll talk a little bit about what you learned, but also how to put the document together, which, is always like a challenge. And I'll mention this later. There's a lot of cutting and pasting big tables from one document into this, and it seems redundant and difficult. We know that, but it's a way to ensure that everything is in the same document to give to the external reviewers in case they don't click the link where the data could live. So we know that there are elements that could be a lot less cumbersome, but we're still working with this. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the self-study review. It has 8 parts, which might seem like a lot. I don't want to say that there are over 70 questions for the grad one, but if someone was to count, they might find that. In each section, you are putting things together related to the conversations, the data, and then your analysis. And so that is what each question is asking. How are you putting the evidence together, and then what is your analysis? So sometimes we say describe and then analyze, and so we want a small summary of what the data says in order for you to get to your analysis. And again, we provide this data for you. You can generate your own data if you want. I mean, especially for smaller programs that aren't doing the ISR survey, this is such a great opportunity to think about how to interact with your students to be able to get some really useful data. And I think with small programs, it's such an amazing experience because of how well you probably know your students. And so you can really identify the best way to get from them the type of critiques and compliments and vision to make the program better. So when I say that there is data and we provide them, in the introduction, for example, you'll need the previous self-study. I'll come back to that in a second. For the program overview, you'll need institutional planning documents. For curriculum, you'll need your academic calendar copy and your program learning outcomes. For things like admission, enrollment, and resources, you need the data kit. And again, that's the OIPA data kit, and you won't get that until February or March. For services and supports, you need the Dean of Libraries letter, all of these things that we help you with. Now, I'm going to come back to this, but I have created for both undergrad and graduate programs a spreadsheet that's color-coded because I like some good color coding where every single question is mentioned. And then I identify like, where might you get the information and when might you engage with this? Because when you see that you don't get the data kit until February or March, it's super easy to be like, okay, I give up, everything is February and March. And like, that's cool. If you want to wait until then to get started on this, you do you. Not a great suggestion. I don't recommend it. But I've just provided some suggestions of where and how to start. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later. But, you know, I get a lot of questions last year, like, where do I begin? And I was like, wherever you want. And they're like, no, but seriously, where do I begin? And I'm like, just download the template and read it and then start answering questions. And they're like, no, where do I begin? And so this is a suggestion of where you can begin. So the template was revised last year. We're still always doing some tweaks. So always check the date of your latest revision to make sure it's current. Right now, the date is September 2023, and we will let you know if there is a new revision from there. But the template was really designed to be very, very user friendly. And if you worked on a CPR like 3 or 4 years ago or beyond that, we really hope that you see these changes quite positively. So we have our big table of contents. I know it looks like a lot. I know, but we're working on that. Like, I mean, we're not making it less work. We're making it a little bit more manageable. In each section, I'm just going to grab a sip of water. In each section, we describe it, which seems, you know, fairly straightforward, but actually we just want to like provide you with some context of what you're doing here. We also then identify what you need to complete this section. So we, like, for example, there is this, by the way, is from last year's. We have updated it. So it's the 2023 to 2028 strategic research plan. But like, you need these documents to work on this. We use clear subheadings and subsections, which again is kind of new, so that I feel like it's a little bit easier to manage your work. And in each subheading, we will repeat what you might need to answer that section. So for example, for the program subsection, questions 2 to 4, you can see you don't need anything. And so maybe that is a good place to start. At the end of each section, not the end of each subsection, but the end of each subsection, we have a section called opportunities. And here we are saying that when you reflect on this section in particular, what are some opportunities you see for development, enhancement, and improvement, and how those things could be integrated into your program? So after you have gone through this kind of exploration of these different pieces, now that you've got to the end, are there like things that you see can be improved, that can be developed, that you really want to enhance? What might that be? And here's the thing, this section 8, so we say like section 8 will do all of this, and section 8 is actually really important. This is section 8. But we found that if we just kind of save it to the end, like if it only shows up at the end, that it could then again feel like a test, right? Like, you've answered all these sections about enrollment and retention and student experience and curriculum, and now like just tell us what you want to change. Like, no, that's not the spirit. So this is section 8, but we invite you through all of the different sections to already start thinking about this. And we say in this final section, after discussion with participants involved in the review, what are the areas that you want to collaboratively focus on to develop, enhance, and improve in your program, and like key actionable items that you are planning on engaging in? So again, if we're thinking about this as an article, our program is good, but of course it can be better. Then what are the ways to make it better? Like, what are those things? What can be developed? What can be enhanced? What can be improved? Even if you just maintain something, I mean, to maintain something still needs these gradual improvements, right? Anything that just stays the same becomes old. Anything that responds to all the different elements of change become kind of constant because it also is changing. I'm sure there's a more articulate way to say that, and probably a whole book of theory I should be quoting. So to be able to think about those things and what are the actions that you can engage in. Again, it is great to say that you need a whole new complement of faculty in a brand new building. Like, that is a very valid recommendation. But I also really encourage you to think about things that your program can do. A lot of times, not in the past year or so, but I have seen past CPRs in which all the recommendations are things like for other people to do. And then the external reviewers are like, okay, but what about what about like making your core courses a little like less complicated, or making a prerequisite structure that's not so complicated. And so it's not just changes for others to make, it's changes that you are also excited to make and can see that need to be made. And so if we go back to my 10 years ago non-York example, the recommendations that we had were to review and revise second year courses, to better align and have conversations about the other core courses to ensure that we have meetings to stay on track, and to revise the program learning outcomes to better articulate the different elements that were coming through in these core courses, and to ensure that we had these increased extracurricular opportunities so students knew grad school was an option. Like, these were all things we could do without feeling like our program was going to change significantly. These were like, yes, this is what we want to do to make sure our program is what we want it to be. So really, this section 8 asks you to think about what is the future, the vision of your program, and how are you going to help realize this vision? And when we ask you at the end of each section, sections 1 through 7, to think about opportunities, we're just saying, like, here is a place that you can start doing that thinking. And this is not new writing, so you can take all of those opportunities that you have put in sections 1 through 7 and just bring them to section 8. So you don't need to do new writing, but maybe what you do is then put them in an order that demonstrates your interest and commitment to fulfilling those recommendations. So section 8 is that consolidation of all these invitations we provided you throughout the self-study, rather than what we had before, which was like, after you've written 7 sections, now be creative and think about what you might want your program to look like in the future. So we're setting you up for that. Always keep that in mind. I just want to flag here on the table of contents that there are a lot of appendices. This is for the undergraduate. The graduate has even more appendices. We will talk more about all the appendices in February and March because a lot of it is coming from the OIPA data. You can look at the template right now, and I really recommend that you download it to take a look. And to see, like, sometimes we say just cut and paste. Sometimes we say like half of it comes from OIPA, but you have to figure out, or not figure out, you have to fill in the other half. That's like area of specialization of faculty. Don't stress about that. So we do kind of help you with that, but we'll talk more about that in February or March. All right, so I think this is a good opportunity, although this is a little bit early, so hopefully she is here, to talk to a program chair who just submitted their CPR about a month ago, to talk about their experience with the process. So Andrea, are you in the room? Or I asked her to come for 11. Are you in the room? I guess that's a no. Okay, no problem. Instead, what I'm going to do is show you the spreadsheet that I created to help you think about the timeline. I know that she's going to share a little bit of her timeline, and so here is another timeline that you can work with. So for both graduate and undergraduate, I have provided a spreadsheet like this, in which all of the questions are listed. Now, there might be wording changes between this version and the version in the template. The version of the template is right. It should be as aligned as possible, but you never know. In this spreadsheet, it's really clear. I identify the section, identify the number, the question, and then I say, like, where can you get the information? And then when could you answer this? So when I say the information, there's like 3 or 4 categories. One is admin, which is like the dean's office or our office, perhaps, like kind of larger structures. When we say you, we don't mean you, we mean like your program. Your program should have this information. Your program colleagues should have this information. Sometimes we say things like colleagues, and in this particular case, we could mean both your program colleagues as well as university colleagues. And so it just kind of points you in the direction of what's what. So there is a couple versions here. Again, I like a good color coding. So there's a version that's color coded. You can also sort, of course, and look at like specific sections. For example, the color coding of the text is by the different times that you could engage in it, things like that. And then I also separated it into tabs. So if you want to take a look at the September-October one, here's a list of questions that you could get started on right away, essentially. And to be honest, this list is kind of long because there is a lot that you can answer without needing a lot of stuff. So how does your program ensure the students are referred to resources in a timely manner? Well, that's a nice conversation to have. Describe the common rooms for faculty and students. You can do that right now, right? So there's tons of stuff that you can be working on right now. In November and January, it's all curriculum stuff, basically. So like I said, we're going to have a workshop at the end of October where we're talking about curriculum. And so I just put all the curriculum stuff just right after that workshop. In February and May, again, it's really all the stuff that needs the OIPA data kit or for you to reflect on the OIPA data kit. And that's what is here in February and May. And when it says like describe and analyze trends related to program enrollment, like, of course, you're going to need to see the data before you can do that, right? So that's really what's here. And then in June and July, it's these kind of consolidated things, or like, how has the library been included? What are the areas you want to focus on? What's the method of this self-study? So I mean, really all I've done is said, okay, if we're talking about curriculum at the end of October, you can work on curriculum from then until when you get the OIPA data kit. Once you get the OIPA data kit, you can work on that until you need to start finalizing the document, and then you can finalize the document. And this list then, the September-October list, sits there for you to work on whenever you want. And so here's what I'm saying about, like, it's your timetable, you do you, because if we have a meeting in March and you're like, oh, I never described the program requirements, even though that's on the list for doing that in September and October, like, okay, no problem. Like, it's totally fine. Those are all just suggestions. And to be honest, I really recommend that you take that list of especially September, October ones and look at what you can do right now that you feel comfortable with, right? Like that early drafting, and then always keep that list on hand to be like, when can we engage in this work? We talk about the retreat coming at the end, the end of the school year, like in the spring. But there's actually a lot of benefit. And this, I really want to give a lot of credit to AMPD's dance program, because they actually planned on having 2 retreats. They planned on having one in December and one in the spring. And so what they did then was they made sure that they had enough work that they could talk about at that December retreat to be really, really productive. And then also have enough work done of the OIPA data in the spring to be able to talk about it then. And that was a really great way for them to ensure that the process stayed on people's mind, was collaborative, and that did not get too cumbersome. Our office provides $45 per head for the retreat catering when they are in person. We often say that whatever you don't spend from that $45 might go towards like catering for students during the site visit. That is in the future. But I mean, $45, like, you can split that into two. That's no problem, right? So I really want to invite you to consider that as a way to structure your own work this year, to think about a winter retreat and think about an April retreat. We have created our resources. We didn't actually plan to have a workshop on retreats, but we found people were asking a lot of questions. And so if we need to do an earlier workshop, because many of you want to do workshops in December, then we can take care of that too. So if you're letting us know that you're doing this work and you have some questions, we can ensure that you have the resources to best support you with that. So you can think about that in terms of how best to engage these conversations amongst colleagues in your program. So I do think I saw Andrea join the room now. I feel like a little bit like a medium at a seance. Andrea, are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, there we go. All right, so I would like to introduce Andrea. She's a faculty member in LMPS. She engaged in the CPR last year, and I thought it would be really great in all these workshops to have some faculty members come and talk about their experiences. And so Andrea is going to, okay, thanks, Patrick. I see that. It's perfect time for a chat to come up. We can take care of that. Patrick said a retreat in workshop in November might be useful for retreats. We can start planning that, no problem. So we thought it would be really great here to have some faculty members speak about their experiences. Andrea was so kind to say that she would be happy to speak about her experience at today's meeting. And so I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Samantha. Can you just enable me to share my screen, please?
Already did.
Great. Wonderful. Whoops. So, thank you, Samantha, for inviting me here today. I'm only going to talk for about 10 minutes. My title is actually, I thought I'd need CPR when I started the CPR. The reason for that was because it looked very daunting, absolutely daunting. I was on sabbatical when our department did their last cyclical program review. And so I had no experience whatsoever with it. As I began to read the template, I got more and more frightened. I saw it as a massive self-study report. The template alone was over 100 pages long. There were all these appendices and all this information that I was not familiar with. And also, I have a thing about acronyms. I'm not very good at remembering what they mean. And there were a raft of them. But the final thing that got me was when I looked at the appendices, all those statistics and numbers and surveys. And despite working for a faculty of math at one point in time, I am simply not good with any of them. So all I did for the first 2 days was cry for help. If you are in the same position, you may be more experienced with CPRs and not have the same feeling. I just wanted to go through a few of the things that helped me, my department, and my team through this. The most important thing to remember is you are never, ever alone. This CPR team, including Samantha, is always ready to assist you and consult with you. They were especially helpful for someone such as myself. Samantha actually advised us about the program learning outcomes. She provided examples of them. She looked at them before we drafted them, met with us, and also after we drafted them, and gave us excellent advice about them. And of course, part of this self-study report is dependent on your PLOs, your program learning outcomes. those numbers that I found so daunting, Iris On from OIPA was kind enough to take us all the way through those confusing numbers and share with us the trends that they saw in the data. That was enormously helpful. And it made drafting those sections of the report much, much easier. Your second resource, of course, is your staff. I do feed mine chocolate, and I tell them on a regular basis how wonderful they are, especially through this process. Within our department, we had an interim AC, Emma Posca, who's experienced with CPRs. She was part of my education about them, and her enthusiasm simply lit up the project. She also kept all of our documents in order. Pardon me, helped with our schedule. And when an emergency arose, she advised and handled it with grace. I would also have to say that Barb Smith was equally wonderful. She is our UPA. And of course, she had to provide and direct getting the course descriptions, the course outlines, and so on and so forth. She was also incredibly helpful with much of the program information. I shouldn't have to point out that the self-study document is supposed to be a collaborative document. And my sense is that too many chairs think that they have to do this on their own. And of course you don't. I actually had 2 UPDs during the course of last year. The first one, unfortunately, left us to go and head McLaughlin College. She was absolutely terrific for the first 4 months of the project. I'm sorry, I'm still recovering from COVID. Our second UPD had already served a 3-year term and so contributed, but lightly. The point is, though, that we got each and every full-time faculty member to work with this document. They know their courses, they're on committees. This is supposed to be collaborative. So at every stage, we called upon them. We were also unfortunate enough to have the 2 main people involved in our previous CPR off. The former chair had retired. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Do you want to go take a glass of water? Okay. While we.
I have some here.
Okay. Let me just say something while you are hydrating.
Yeah.
Things like people knowing their process and working with staff members, and like this is you're going to find that there are things that are not archived and stored in your program office, whatever that looks like, whether that's SharePoint or an actual like file cabinet, in the best way that it should be. And you're going to get frustrated by that 100%. So, I mean, I can't help you with that. You're going to have to work through that frustration, but also set this process up so that you then also are keeping track of those documents, like setting up a process so that they do become easier to find. So, for example, one of the things that you need early on is your previous self-study and all of the reports related to that. And a lot of times people are like, well, where do we find that? And I mean, it's your document. Like you should be able to find it. And you should know those recommendations. Like a lot of people are like, I've never seen this before. And so if you are starting this process in a way that is really collaborative and collegial and really clear about the things that you want to achieve, then it becomes more like over the next cycle, it will become more ubiquitous in your program about like where that document is, but also like what that document has to say. So just kind of keep that in mind, that while you're doing for right now, you can also do for the future. And just as a note for your previous self-study, we will provide you with a copy when we create a Teams folder for you, and you'll get those invitations in the next couple weeks. Again, there's a lot of work on our end because there are so many programs, and we're super happy to support you on that. But again, just a little bit of grace as we are working through that. But these are a really good point to be able to think about how you can set up your conversations with your colleagues and the staff members in your units and your programs to set yourself up right now and also for the future. And that's something that I really thought of when you were talking, Andrea. Are you ready to talk again?
Yes, I
Okay.
am.
All
I'll
right.
try not to inhale any more dust from the construction outside, and I do apologize for the interruption. I'm going to talk in a minute about how we involve the faculty members a bit. I won't go into a lot of detail. To go back to my point, those involved in the previous CPRs, talk to them and make them part of the team because their experience is invaluable. So where we began was first by reviewing the timeline and then reading the entire template to get a sense of the amount of work. Also, the dependencies. What information did we need to be able to complete the various sections? And we created our own timeline out of that. We also did, as Samantha just mentioned, read the previous CPR documents, which were supplied. And there is a section in the current CPR that asks you about the recommendations from the previous CPR. That was easy for me to direct to be filled out because 2 people had answers about what had happened since the previous ones about each and every recommendation. What we also discovered, however, was about the amount of introductory information that could be repeated or tweaked for the current self-study, and also a sense of the expectations, how to approach each of the sections, and what information would be needed. Emma and Barb, our staff members, helped immensely in making sure that we had the information we needed to work with each of the 7 primary sections. But some of the information you do have to collect through such things as student surveys from your faculty members and so on and so forth. One of the first things we did was check our program learning outcomes against the template. And we discovered very early on that because of the length and complexity of our PLOs, they really weren't, shall I say, workable for doing something like putting on our website or fitting into the template. So we took the opportunity to revise them through the process. Our collaborative approach, I will say right from the beginning that we were heavily reliant on what I would call small, flexible subcommittees of maybe 3 to 4 people for many of the tasks. And that was one of the ways to draw faculty members in. So we spent our first term planning, gathering information. We had a small subcommittee draft the student survey questions so that those could go out. I think it was in November. We also drafted the introductory sections. We called on faculty members to help us write the sections about things like SDGs, et cetera, et cetera. So my job during this time was to help with the planning. It was to collate information and to revise it. We also identified all the dependencies and worked those into the schedule. So the student survey results, for example, did not come in till March or April. And so we couldn't complete the sections that relied on those. We did hold 2 retreats, by the way. They were quite focused. The first one had the focus of reviewing our current PLOs and drafting new ones. I would emphasize again, Samantha provided us with excellent examples. Once we took the results of that retreat, we formed a small subcommittee to refine them, keeping in mind what the department thought and had asked for. And that subcommittee actually refined the PLOs. We took those back to the program committee for approval and then to the department for approval. And that was incredibly helpful getting those done early. From January to April, we were focusing on completing the numbers and the survey sections, including that deep dive into program retention, etc. And that's when we consulted Iris, not just once, but twice, I believe, especially when I couldn't understand some of the results and needed them repeated. We had our PLOs completed completely through the approval process by February. And all faculty members could then contribute to the appendices that you need about how courses meet the PLOs or which ones do, and also the assignments. So that was quite easy. We just posted them to SharePoint and had everyone fill in their particular sections, and then went through to make sure that everything was formatted properly and consistent. We also started on the reviewers fairly early. It was actually February. We had a small flexible subcommittee tasked with creating a long list of external and internal reviewers. We then took that to the program committee, who created a short list for us. We also received the student survey results, which meant more sections could be completed. We were in very good time to submit the list of reviewers to the dean's office and to complete the student survey sections, the parts that rested on that. We actually put the document to date up on SharePoint or OneDrive. Emma did this for us. And we threw it open for faculty comments. So everyone in the department could comment or ask for revisions or point out additions. After that review cycle, we held the second retreat. We had left all of the opportunity section. There is an opportunity section after each of the main sections. We had left those open. We filled those out, and we filled out the overview, the closing opportunity section, through that second retreat. We also found time to discuss the revisions that had been requested and to take new suggestions for language and direction. By June, we had the revised draft up for review again. And that self-study document obtained approval from the program committee and from the entire department. So we went through all the internal processes. We submitted in July, and fortunately, the team doing the reviewing was very swift to get us feedback. This means, our CPR team, whom you submit to, we got our requests for revisions in good time. Those revisions were completed and approved by the executive committee because we were on summertime at the time. And I am very pleased to announce that the self-study report, the revised one, the approved one, was submitted in time for the chair, that would be me, to get married in August, which I didn't think was going to happen. So it was a collaborative process all the way through, and the department really pulled together on this one. One of my objectives was, as Samantha said, to make sure that the next time we do a CPR, that others in the department are knowledgeable about the process and the expectations. So I would emphasize from my own experience, collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. Be fearless in asking your faculty members for input. And if at any point you find that you're not quite sure what you're supposed to do, just ask. Help is always at hand. I have to add that when I began this process, I thought of it as a massive piece of work. I was not nearly as enthusiastic as my administrative coordinator, but I did come around. The department saw it, as an excellent opportunity for that, for self-study. Pardon me. And to discuss possible directions for the future of our programs. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak. I'm sorry, I'm still recovering from COVID. If you have questions or would like to chat at any time, I would be happy to do so. And once again, thank you, Samantha, for inviting me here.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and congratulations on your marriage. I didn't realize that was another internal deadline that you were working towards.
Yes.
Yeah, and you know, I should just say from my perspective too, it was a real pleasure to work with writing, because I would say something and it's so hard sometimes when you're working with programs and you don't know everyone and you're like, I don't know how any of that landed. And I think that's how I thought after our first conversation about curriculum and program learning outcomes. And then they sent me like, so what do you think of these? And I was like, oh, these are amazing. You did such a great job. And so it's really nice to be able to work with programs and then see the results of their self-study, but also like really get the sense that it was meaningful for them. And that's the goal and the type of work that I'm trying to support. So thank you so much, Andrea. That was really great.
You're very welcome. Can I stay for a bit?
Yeah, well, we're just going to finish up, so you can stay, and then we're going to turn the
Right.
recording off. And if anyone has any questions, maybe you can answer them if they're directed towards you.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I do think we're on time, which is really great. So we're just going to kind of wrap it up to talk about like where you can get support and all of that stuff. And I just want to be clear that like I feel like I am doing my job when you ask me questions. It's actually not necessarily right now. It's a lot to manage when you're looking at the chat, but like I definitely think that's part of my job. Like, sure, I can get you the answers, but if you're engaging so that you're asking questions and thinking about it, to me, that is the best case scenario. And I worked with a faculty member last year and he's like, you know, I went through my notebook and I realized how many times I ask you the same question because I've seen the answer here 3 times. And I'm like, that's okay. You weren't ready to hear the answer yet. Now, to be clear, when we're talking about things like, you know, money for retreats or, you know, like other types of things like that, you know, those types of procedural questions get kind of frustrating to answer. Again, I don't actually answer those. Nina delightfully answers those. But when you have questions about the ways that you're engaging in your self-study, that is what we are here for. So there's a couple resources I want to point out to you. We created a webpage that is CPR self-study. For some weird reason, this is not linking to the page it's supposed to. So I will make sure that you have this particular link as we figure out what that looks like. But it is, you know, YorkU UCAP CPR support. We've organized it according to the different workshops, but we have put material in these areas when we have them, and we will keep doing that. So right now, I'll put this little video up as soon as we're done here. Just a couple reminders, some templates. These are the links to that spreadsheet that I showed you for learning outcomes. Like, look, I've been working on a website for a very long time. This is all about curriculum development, innovation. Here's a whole thing about learning outcomes. I know people don't like them, and one of the reasons why I think is because previous lists really just felt like an accounting of how you were meeting the degree level expectations. Those lists were long. They really did not reflect your program. And so what I'm really trying to emphasize when I am messaging this is that learning outcomes should be representing your uniquenesses in the program. They should only be 8 to 10 or 8 to 12. And you should be able to like really understand your courses within these. And so the model, when we're talking about revising them, it's not revising them so that you get another 50 learning outcomes. It's revising them so you get a set of maybe 10 learning outcomes for your program that really demonstrates the uniquenesses of your programs. And so when Andrea had said, like, they really weren't workable, we want to move away from that model. 50 learning outcomes is not as effective in some cases as a nice, concise set. So this website is available for you. It's my voice. You'll hear me in it. And I will be, this is what the workshop in October is about, but you can get started. And this is all about the different mapping that you need. We ask for more maps than we did previous, but it's because we actually want to better move, like, rather than put everything in one chart, so then it starts to become very muddled. By putting things in different charts, we think that it is easier to be able to see the ways that all of these different things interact. So it might seem like more work, but actually it's actually less work and more meaningful work. And to be clear, you can work with me on your learning outcomes, but the Teaching Commons, they're fantastic and they can work with you as well. You also might have curriculum support people in your faculties. You can work with them as well. I have a checklist of like ways to think about your program learning outcomes. So if you don't talk to any of those people, but you want to look at the checklist, you can do that too. But that's what we will talk about exclusively in at the end of October. We will then talk about storytelling with data. Now, for those of you who your program is a smaller, so the ISR is not doing a survey for you, we have created 2 documents. When I say we, it's our office as well as ISR, that provide some alternatives to the ISR student survey, as well as focus group and discussion guide and a consent form. And so we provided this for you. This isn't something that we've necessarily done in the same way previous years, but we wanted to make sure that you had some work. And again, like, this is not a test about how and in what ways you do this. If you want to do a Google form and send that to your students and not do a focus group, like that's okay, right? You can think about that, about different ways to get student conversation. And then Western U has a good resource as well. So that is, if that's useful. So take a look at these links if you are a smaller program and you're not going to be working with the ISR, because like I said, might be able to get some really interesting conversations because you might know your students in a really nice way because it's a smaller program. We already put some tips here for retreats. Someone said a retreat workshop in November would be good. We can make that happen. That's completely okay. So I will make sure you have the links, both of these links, and we will figure out why it is not linking to the main website. So, that's just went to Andrea. And I will send that to everybody. And so that is something that you can think about as well. All right. And then as a way to conclude, let's talk a little bit about reminders or where to begin. Like, start with the self-study template, take a look at it, see what's there. Make sure you're looking at the September version. We'll let you know if there were changes after September. Sometimes that happens. I have a slight learning disability. I don't always see things like typos. And so they're always like, you might have seen one today. You might have seen something pop up, so we like to fix those, but we'll let you know if there's anything significant. Take a look at those spreadsheets that I created. And again, those links are on that CPR website about where you might begin, what might be easy to begin with, and identify where and how you might find information. So yeah, the OIPA data kit. But also, like, maybe you want to create a survey for your program colleagues, or maybe you want to do a focus group for students, even if you have ISR data. Maybe you want to start striking those subcommittees to look at a particular things, like start thinking about how you're going to operationalize these conversations and whether or not you are going to be collecting additional data. Some reminders, watch the launch video if you haven't already watched it. It's available on that website. Lyndon Martin presents, and he talks more about the UCAP, but what's really, and he does a great job of really talking about the evidence and data and the importance of coming up with these recommendations. But another really key part of that launch meeting is that we introduce you to experts that can support the process. So we introduce you to OIPA, we introduce you to ISR, we introduce you to the libraries. Our office is also introduced. So just take a look, have it on in the background so you can hear like that official launch meeting. If you are working with ISR, make sure you contact them. It's also good to start contacting the library now. There's no reason to wait to the end to contact them about the library letter. But also the library is such a wonderful resource for collaboration and curriculum and pedagogy. And I think sometimes we always like think, oh, like they're there and they can really help the students. They can do a workshop and move on. But actually you can work with them in these really integrative ways to develop certain elements of the curriculum. So it's worth talking to them earlier rather than later. And decide if you want a fall or a winter site visit. That will depend on the due date. So if you want a fall site visit, the due date is July the 15th for the self-study. If you want a winter site visit, then the due date is October 15th. And yes, those are the two dates. I prepare, like in my role, I always prepare for that July, that summer due date. So I will be having my head in gear that everyone will be finishing in July. That may or may not be so, but just so you know, like, again, if you don't start until August, for example, I'll just be like, oh, well, we're going to do the where to begin workshop and not the how to finish it workshop. Like that's where the heads of a lot of our people in our office will be thinking about. And also in the next week or so, couple weeks, you're going to get an email that wants you to confirm the programs they're actually under review and the contact people. This confirmation of programs is really important because maybe it's listed on the academic calendar, but that program or like that version of the program or that degree type is not actually in operation anymore, or it's been closed or whatever. Let's just make sure they're in alignment. And emails are fun. You all are you as your unique, wonderful selves, but you may also have a title. And so you might have two email addresses. And so you want both it to go to your personal, but also it's important for the like professional title one. Make sure we have the right, sorry about the lawnmower, make sure that we have the right contact information. And again, please be patient with us as we work through that. I'm going to be sending out the links from today's meeting with a distribution list that we created, which is new for our office. So if that's a disaster, it's a disaster. So again, please just be patient with us. We also don't want you to have redundant email. We want you to get the email in your box to be able to answer right away because it came to the right people and it's really clear what we need from you. So for questions, these are everyone in our office, all things CPR process. Like that's Nina. She's been doing this the longest actually out of all three of the people on the screen. She knows a lot about the process. And if there is an element that she can't answer, she gets it to the right person. Jennifer Bethune is our director of academic programs and policies, like all things CPR, all things UCAP, like she is like the main person for that. And all of those kind of big questions can go there, or you can send it to us and then we can make sure when they are bigger questions, then we can answer that she gets those. And then again, I am here. I'll be running all the workshops. I can help you with the analysis and the process, like this type of process. I can help you with the curriculum. All of those different things. Again, I feel like it's my job when I'm doing my job correctly when you have a lot of questions, and I do see there are questions in the chat, and I'll take a look at those. And so if the questions aren't for me, like they're not the right type of question that I can answer, I will also make sure that you get to the right people to be able to answer them as well. But our goal in our office is to make sure you have a really streamlined, easy process so you can really focus on analysis and recommendations. And we are so excited to be able to help you with that, because it's such a pleasure to be able to ensure that everyone's commitment and vision for the work and the teaching and the research that they do is aligned with the programs that they teach in and the curriculum that they work within and the courses that they teach. So thank you in advance for engaging in this work. And thank you all for coming to today's workshop. I'm going to stop recording so it won't be a public video anymore, and then I can take any questions that anyone has. So until the next workshop, I will see you then, but you don't need to hang up.